Tonight, the meat market takes a hit.
You haven't laid anybody off.
Right.
Should I say yet?
We work with the men shoulder to shoulder. That would be our last resort, is a layoff.
Also, where did all your tax dollars go?
You took some big risks, you paid off big in the glory years. Those are over, and capitalism without bankruptcy is like Christianity without hell.
And numb to the big numbers.
1 million seconds takes about 11.5 days, and 1 billion seconds takes 32 years, and 1 trillion seconds, 32,000 years.
We'll bring you the news tonight on Dan Rather Reports.
Good evening from New York. Tonight, employers on the edge, seeing the economic clouds darken, desperately trying to save their workforce. The economic news continues to be grim. The unemployment rate in the United States has grown to 8.5%, the highest in a quarter century. Over the last several months, we've reported on those who've already fallen victim to this economic downturn, and we've also talked to economists to explore the larger financial currents at play. But in this broadcast, we approach the economic crisis from a different point of view. While millions have already lost their jobs, many millions more are in danger of joining the ranks of the unemployed. And in an interconnected economy, the failure of one business threatens the well-being of many others. So tonight, one industry and how the economic crisis is sowing unease. Our focus is beef and a growing uncertainty that stretches from the plains of Nebraska to the plates of New York's most exclusive restaurants. We begin at a New York institution, the legendary 21 Club, where a power business lunch with a nice bottle of wine could easily set you back a couple $100 each. In good times, these bills were just part of the cost of doing business. But with expense accounts shrinking, even this venerable clubhouse for New York's heaviest hitters is having to face up to the new reality.
Number 21, with its iron gate on 52nd Street, Manhattan, between 5th and 6th Avenue, was and still is the most famed and prosperous speakeasy establishment.
The 21 Club has always been as much a boardroom as it is a dining room for New York's business elite.
People like Elliot Roosevelt and Hollywood's spectacular Orson Welles.
Everyone from U.S. presidents to A-list celebrities to luminaries from the world of sports to Wall Street's famed masters of the universe have filled the homey barroom or one of its more discreet banquet rooms. They've made deals over its famous filet mignon, an expensive bottle or bottles of wine from the 21 Club's celebrated cellar, and signed the meals onto corporate expense accounts. The 21 Club is an iconic restaurant with an almost umbilical attachment to Wall Street's success and excess.
It was once said there's more deals made at the bar at 21 than there is in boardrooms around the United States.
But over lunch, the 21 Club's general manager, Brian McGuire, told me that he faces the biggest challenge of his 21-year career here. The free-spending Chateau Lafite swilling steak for lunch 80s, 90s, and early 21st century have sputtered.
The club has a reputation of being Wall Street's dining room.
Sure.
Is it still that?
It's still that and then some. Wall Street is very much been a part of 21's history, presence, and hopefully future. It's going through some tough times these days, but I guess just like anything else, hopefully that will rebound. This is the upstairs kitchen, and we do banquets out of here. And we also do service for our second restaurant, the upstairs at 21. So
Brian McGuire took me on a backstage tour of the kitchen and introduced me to some of the 40-odd employees.
Yeah, we got our sirloin steaks. They are dry-aged, 21 days.
It was the lunchtime rush, and they were prepping steaks for the hungry customers that dine in the two restaurants of the 21 Club.
the bar room, the more famous of the two, goes back to really the beginning, and where they shot movies like Wall Street with Charlie Sheen and Michael Douglas.
Louis?
Yes, sir.
Take care of my friend. Have a good lunch, buddy.
The downstairs bar room where I ate still fills up for most lunches and dinners. I came during off hours because 21 wanted to protect the privacy of its patrons. But it's the restaurant's banquet business that has been hit particularly hard. The 10 private dining rooms could house events for anywhere from 10 to 400 guests. The titans of Wall Street once thought little of dropping tens of thousands of dollars entertaining clients and toasting themselves. But McGuire says the word on everybody's lips now has made its way to the 21 Club.
Well, let's talk about the recession. How has it affected your business?
Dan, I think everybody in town, everybody in the United States is probably affected the same way, and very few places that I know of, if any, can say that their business is up. Most people are saying their business is down, and key becomes how much they're down. I read an article recently where they actually referred to doing events, cocktail parties, dinners, as almost being vulgar. Okay, and I think that was the term they used. Well, those aren't terms that really help a place like ours here. So our banquet business has been, taking a hit because of that.
This is John Greeley, our executive chef here. Hey, John. And he's expediting lunch right now for about 120 people outside. People are spending less, on wine and the like, but we've been maintaining our market share and
let's keep our fingers crossed.
Oh, yeah, it's been...
McGuire and others we spoke to for this story were cautious about describing their situation as a crisis. Reminding potential customers of the recession will only scare them away. But the recession has forced Mr. McGuire to make some tough decisions to keep the 21 Club in business. He's had to lay off staff, and he recognizes dozens, even hundreds of connected businesses also depend on the 21 Club to prosper.
If a restaurant is doing not as well, then the delivery person for a company is not doing as well to the wholesaler who supplies that delivery person's business is not doing well, and everything just backs up, and it causes everybody really to, cut down on their business and go with less.
We're off in sales, I would say about 20%.
I visited Mark Solas, whose family business provides prime cut beef to the 21 Club. His company, Master Purveyors, is based in the Bronx at one of the world's largest wholesale food markets.
The filet mignon sits inside here, and then you have the top cut steaks, which would be over in here,
Right.
and then your top round, your roast beefs, come from the leg.
Master Purveyors has been losing as much as $20,000 a week since the recession hit and has had to think fast to adapt. After more than 50 years, this family business is facing its biggest challenge yet.
Since the stock market took a tumble, we started to see that sales dipped for a couple of reasons. The main reason that people, instead of going out to dinner 4 or 5 times a week, they cut back and they are now going out twice a week. They'll go to the supermarkets now before they'll go out to dinner.
Compared to other wholesalers, Master Purveyors is a pretty small operation. All 45 men who work there do a little bit of everything. That includes Mark, his brother Scott, even his 81-year-old father, the founder of the business, Sam Solas.
Tell me about your personal background. How did you get into this?
Well, I guess my father was born into it, and then my brother and I were born into it. When I was 6 or 7 years old, I can recall my father waking us up to bring us to work. Our white coats were so long that we had to pin them up and roll up the sleeves so far because they'd rub against the floor. Oh, Mr. Abbott, this is my father, Sam.
Sam, how do you do?
How are you?
Pleasure
Nice
to meet you.
It's a pleasure.
As a 6-year-old in Poland, Sam Solas began learning how to butcher meat from his father.
I suspect at 81 he can cut this meat better than anybody back in that room.
My father would say, and how?
I did it on Saturday.
Sam Solas has worked almost every day since he was a boy. He was the only member of his family who managed to escape death in a Nazi concentration camp, and the meat business literally kept him alive. First, as an apprentice butcher in the Jewish ghetto in Poland, then in Israel, where, as a teenage refugee, he earned a living cutting meat. When he came to New York at the end of World War II, he was able to find work right away at Manhattan's downtown meat market.
Here was in Hamburg. We were going to the boat to come to the United States.
Sam Solas started his own business in 1957, selling meat from his truck to a number of high-end restaurants, including the 21 Club. But after decades of consistent growth, Master Purveyors has hit a wall. The recession has this company reeling more than others because its customers are the eateries most affected by tightened expense accounts.
It doesn't take much imagination to see how this will be at a top steakhouse, maybe the priciest thing on the menu.
Dry aged prime meat is pricey.
The Solas family is selling the same high-quality meat it has since 1957, but demand for this pricey beef has dropped in the past few months.
So when did you begin to see the recession cut into your business?
We started to see the recession cut in somewhere around the turn of the new year. Right after New Year's, people were more concerned about their credit cards from all the gifts that they bought during Christmas and New Year's. And that's when they started to cut back. And since our clientele is, your business end, business clientele, that's when they started being more concerned about their jobs. You started hearing stories about Citibank and some of the other big businesses. Those financial officers started to cut back also.
And expense accounts got to be perused more closely, less expense account money, that sort of thing?
Right.
The Solas family is selling recession-friendly, cheaper cuts of meat to their upscale clients, including the 21 Club. They've also added cheaper products like pork and chicken. And they're not alone. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that restaurants are buying less beef because of a drop in consumer demand. This has led to dropping cattle prices. So low now, they no longer cover the cost of production. And industry groups say ranchers plan on raising fewer heads next year.
Ricky, make me a top round for 21. Ricky, make me a top round.
Mark Solas sees even his upscale customers looking to carve up the steaks into less expensive cuts.
Yeah, how much? 20 pounds? Thank you. But we've been selling the 21 since 1960. And they've been a loyal customer for over 4 decades. And they started to add on as specials, I think, boneless short ribs, which is also from the front end of the animal, the carcass.
Less expensive.
Less expensive. And this way they can offer an affordable lunch, a meal, and still maintain their market share in the restaurant business. Jay, you had the 20 pounds of 1-inch cubes for 4 season?
Mark Solas feels a tremendous responsibility to keep his workers employed. Many have worn Master Purveyors white coats for decades, and most support large families.
You haven't laid anybody off.
Right.
Should I say yet?
Well, there's a lot more we can do before even getting to that. Number one, we told all the men that had earned vacation, take your vacations now that we owe them. So this way I don't have to get to the point of a layoff. I'd owe that money to them anyway. We work with the men shoulder to shoulder. That would be our last resort, is a layoff.
But it isn't just Master Purveyors' 45 employees that rely on Solas to keep their families fed. Hundreds of related businesses connected to Master Purveyors depend on the company to stay healthy.
Hold up, Rick.
Mark Solas thinks of the recession as a cancer and his business as the lymph nodes. If it's in the lymph nodes, he says, then everyone is infected.
It's easy to say, listen, these Wall Street guys and the people who buy at high-end restaurants, they're getting theirs and that's good. But that has if you will, a permeate down effect right through the country.
It starts from the top down. If they're not going to the top-end restaurants, it trickles down to even my men. I think that our business is the backbone of the country. We're connected to the restaurants. We're connected to the hotels. We're connected to the cleaners, the people that clean the coats, the bus boys, the wait staff, the people in the back of the house, in the back of the kitchen.
And let's not forget about the people who raise the cattle. People like John Maddox, a Nebraska rancher, who provides meat to Master Purveyors. Like the wholesaler and the 21 Club, Maddox is feeling squeezed by the recession. Demand and prices for the top-end loins and ribeyes he is accustomed to selling have dropped. Customers are now clamoring for cheaper cuts, like hamburger, driving those prices up.
Well, you know, I think the interesting thing is that for some cuts of beef, some of the lower-priced cuts, I'm talking about hamburger and I'm talking about roasts and some of those cuts are actually higher in price today than they were this time last year. Where we really have seen a decline in the value of that carcass is the loins, the ribeyes, the real high-quality cuts that are used by the hotel and restaurant trade. And because their business is off, there's been much, much less demand for those high-quality cuts.
John Maddox raises up to 3,000 head of cattle on these 30,000 acres in western Nebraska. He comes from a long line of ranchers, and when we were there, he was training the latest generation.
Come on, get up here.
His niece, Eva, visiting from California.
Okay, drop. Drop. Excellent. Very nicely done. My great-grandfather came out and homesteaded over at the feedlot on the Stinking Water Creek back in 1886. So we've been here for 123 years, I guess. It's kind of a heritage of our family, and all of us really love the business. We love the cattle business. We love the lifestyle and the work that goes along with it. It's something that's in our blood and something we really appreciate. You know, tough times and hard times are not strangers around here. And, you know, my grandfather had difficult times in the 30s, but, you know, we survived it, and we survived it by hunkering down and not spending any extra money and getting by with what with a little less than maybe we wanted, but the better times improved when things came around.
Oh.
Maddox says he's confident demand for choice cuts of beef will rebound soon, along with the markets themselves, and his unique background lends him more credibility than your average cowboy.
Well, I went on to the University of Nebraska and got my degree in animal science. And after that, I decided I wanted to go to business school. So I went to the University of Chicago and got my master's in business administration and decided I'd like to try something else before I came back to ranching, and ended up getting a job and working for Goldman Sachs in New York City for about a dozen years. Get out of there. I would go through the Zaggett's Guide to restaurants, and I would pick out all the steak restaurants in New York, and I would try to visit them annually with my customers. So I was part of that demand when I was back in New York. And with the financial meltdown that we've had in the last 6 months, I just have no doubt that those generous expense accounts are now curtailed pretty dramatically.
He misses certain things about New York, but is happy to be back on the ranch, even during these tougher times.
You know, it was a very easy choice, really, because I love the business. I love the business of being in the cattle business, and I love the work, and I love livestock, being around horses and cattle, and so from that standpoint, it was easy. Excelente! Excelente trabajo!
Maddox also loves the people he works with, and he's using his experience in the business world to see that they stay employed at his ranch.
We have a long history of keeping employees, and we just don't ever let people go. I mean, for 120 years, I don't think we've ever let somebody go for any reason, I don't think. And I think because of that, we have some great employees and a great deal of loyalty, and several of them have worked for us in excess of 30 years.
Maddox says he'll do the same as everyone else we spoke to. Stretch his resources, innovate, and make do with less.
You know, that means I drive my pickup an extra few years, and I We don't buy any extra equipment. If we can get by without it, we're trying to get by with what we have.
All right, Lou, you're going to go 7 burgers, 5 big rare, 3 get cheddar, 1 gets American.
Back at the 21 Club, General Manager Brian McGuire is also trying to stay positive.
Dan Rather, this is Frank Diaz.
Hi, Frank. How are you?
You
Nice
know
to
who
see
this
you.
gentleman
Thank
is?
you. Thank you very much.
This young man is the very best, by far, receiver of food in New York, or if not the United States. We can't deal without him.
He says he values those he works with, and while he's had to lay some people off, he's working hard to save the jobs that remain.
Our restaurant business for the first 3 months, people-wise, is only 50 people different from last year. And to us, that's really critical, and we really feel pretty good about that. People's spending habits, on the other hand, are down, mostly because people aren't buying expensive wines. Corporations have cut back on their expense accounts. I think people are watching what they can spend so they can dine out twice a week instead of once.
But the stalwart 21 Club has managed to stay in business for 80 years because it has an unusually loyal clientele, one willing to keep coming back. Brian McGuire told me one story that showed just how devoted 21 Club's customers can be.
21 had been located on West 49th Street, and when they were going to tear that building down to build what's now Rockefeller Center, after a New Year's Eve party, the patrons and the owners and the employees picked up all of the tables and chairs and their illegal spirits that they had during Prohibition and the iron gates and moved up here to West 52nd Street. So it's quite an interesting story.
But one of the most famous stories from that time is how the 21 Club kept its upscale clientele liquored up in the days of Prohibition.
So, after having had their stash confiscated once in 1930, the owners went out, hired an architect, and built a secret cellar in the neighbor's building at the time, and had the secret door constructed as part of the foundation wall. So it's 4,000 pounds, and it's opened with a long, thin meat skewer about 18 inches in length that you put into a hole in the wall.
It's off of one of the private banquet halls that are now too often vacant. To keep the crowds flowing in, the 21 Club has recently made a few changes to decades-old conventions. In January, it got a great deal of press when it slightly softened its dinner-time dress code, allowing men to go tieless. Jackets are still required. And the 21 Club decided to extend a deal it's had in place since early winter that reduced the price of its fixed-price dinners until Labor Day.
It's been working for us. I think it's been working for the dining public. And if people during these tough times are going to be looking for value and they're going to be looking for quality, we think that we offer both here. And we're going to keep riding that horse, so to speak, while it's been successful for us.
And then there's good old-fashioned hustle.
And if you bring some of the 21 sauce as well, Eric, okay? Thank you.
Waiters have been asked to be more energetic.
We try to be a little more, I hate to use the word aggressive, but maybe a little bit more aggressive in our selling techniques. If you have people who are spending less, you will try to sell them a little bit more. You might add some things to the menu, get people who erstwhile maybe might not order dessert to possibly, share a dessert or something like that.
And when it comes to beef, McGuire says the quantity sold is about the same. It's the quality of cuts that's changed.
Well, have you found that they're ordering less beef?
Actually not. We've had things like braised beef on there or hanger steak. These are beef items that we might not have on during the year that we've added during these recessionary times.
So you put on the menu less expensive kinds of beef as a choice.
As a choice, yeah. So people have what we normally sell anyway, what we normally would sell, and there are new additional items on there, so people can feel comfortable ordering something, still get a really quality meal, and not just a salad or pasta.
Heart of 21 is its kitchen, through which nightlife tourists are occasionally conducted with pride by host Mac Prindler.
Our kitchen is one of the best in town, but what really makes it is the staff.
For all of the businesses and people hanging on the 21 Club's success, here's one bit of good news. The club opened at this location at the start of 1929, just before the big stock market crash, right in the middle of Prohibition. Despite these odds, the restaurant has managed to survive for 80 years, at times allowing patrons to pay with paintings, which still adorn the walls, or offering IOUs, known as scrips, for meals.
These days, when people are asking us, what are you doing during these recessionary times, we haven't quite gotten to the point of extending a scrip yet, and nobody has offered us a Remington painting in exchange for a steak, but you know, we've been trying to provide value, you know, at lesser prices and let people sort of quantify the experience before they get here, let them know what they have.
I didn't know that about the Remington paintings, which I've admired many times. So you haven't had some former, now laid off out of a job, corporate executive bring his golf clubs in and say, on the quiet, what are the clubs worth? I'll pay off my bar bill and give you some strips so I can come back.
It hasn't happened yet. Hasn't happened yet.
It should be noted that the economic downturn has affected less pricey restaurants as well. The New York Times reported that mid-market chains like Applebee's and Friday's will have to close more than 1,000 branches to weather this recession. That means thousands of restaurant workers could soon be out of work. Only one sector of the restaurant industry appears to be thriving: fast food restaurants like McDonald's, Taco Bell, and Subway, which are offering full meals for less than $5. Now, coming next, still trying to figure out what happened to the billions sent to banks.
Missed an edition of Dan Rather Reports, or just want to see one again? We're now available on iTunes, so check us out.
Last fall, as the extent of the financial crisis was becoming known, Congress passed the $700 billion Emergency Stabilization Act. This was the money to help banks in trouble. At the same time, lawmakers also set up an oversight panel to track just where and how that money was spent. The person chosen to chair that panel was the distinguished Harvard law professor Elizabeth Warren. We spoke to Professor Warren a few months ago when she was just beginning to follow the money. Now, 6 months into the job, we thought we'd pay her another visit and get an update.
This hearing is called to order.
The committee's latest report has now been made public.
The very first question we asked consisted of only 4 words, but probably the most important 4 words in the report. What is Treasury's strategy?
I met Professor Warren in Washington. Your most recent report tells us what?
Well, it tells us that Treasury is following a path to try to deal with the financial institutions, in effect, by subsidizing them, just giving them taxpayer dollars. There's an alternative approach, and that's the approach, in effect, to reorganizing or liquidating these banks.
So it's 2 tracks.
2 tracks. Treasury has, for now, chosen the subsidy track. What we put forward in the newest proposal out today is a discussion of alternative cases in which we've chosen that other track of liquidating the bad institutions.
What do you think of the Treasury Department's dealings, just choosing this track?
I'm deeply troubled on a couple of levels. The first one is I'm not hearing a plan for when this stops. You know, it's very hard when you start feeding, particularly in the billions of dollars, in the tens of billions of dollars. There's no description of, and it stops when. I'm also deeply concerned that we have left in place the managers who wrecked some of these banks to begin with, the investors who invested in it and who got profits from it during the good years, and we're asking the taxpayers to continue to support them at a time, quite frankly, when the taxpayers are under a lot of stress themselves.
Any other options that you've thought about that are worth considering?
There are ways to tweak either one of these plans. But what people want to remember is it's the basic division that starts. Is the point of the undertaking, of the taxpayer contribution, is it to save the people who ran these financial institutions and in effect to kind of keep them whole like they were before? Or is the point to say, you know, this is how capitalism works. You took some big risks, you paid off big in the glory years, those are over, and here's, you know, capitalism without bankruptcy is like Christianity without hell. This is where the discipline comes in. You're gone, and the next group of banks, the banks that were prudent, the banks who didn't get out there and do crazy lending, the banks that may be the regional-sized banks, this is their chance to pick up those new deposits, to pick up that new business, to grow and grow from a position of greater security.
As I understand it, the overarching theory is, look, you help the banks, you help the big guys, and yes, they're the ones who created this, but you have to hold your nose to help them, because if you help them, stabilize them, then it will permeate down to the middle economic class and below.
You know, if that had been the goal, then the appropriate way to do that was to say, I'm willing to put out here $700 billion, but here are the terms. Come to me with a plan that shows me how you're going to increase small business lending, that shows me how you're going to put this in the hands of consumers at reasonable prices and without a lot of tricks and traps, that shows me how you're going to help stop the foreclosure crisis. Instead, we just handed this money out on a kind of don't ask, don't tell policy. Here's the money, and the government, the Treasury Department, hoped it would be used in a way that would trickle down.
This month is the 6th month of the Oversight Committee that you chair. Mm-hmm. Do you know where all of the TARP money is?
No.
I'm always astonished. You gave that answer the last time. That's been many weeks ago. But you still don't know where all of it is?
No.
How can that be?
I can't know if Treasury won't ask. They handed out the money, no strings attached, and that means it's gone without our knowing where it is.
Do we have an idea? Do we have a pretty good idea what the banks have done with this money?
No.
Again, no?
No.
Well, has it all been accounted for in some way?
No.
I want you to explain to me and explain to the audience how this can be. We have these billions, even over $1 trillion given away or in the process of being given away, and you're telling me we don't know what the banks have done with it. There's been no accountability, or very, very little, if any. I don't understand how this can happen.
I wish I could give a better answer. It happened because starting last October, Secretary of the Treasury, Paulson, set up a plan to hand out money. This was under the previous presidential administration? That's exactly right. It was under the previous administration.
Well, now we have a new administration, new Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Geithner. What has changed?
Secretary Geithner has made a commitment to be more transparent and ask for more accountability from the financial institutions. So there have been some changes. They are modest.
Well, they're advertised as major changes,
No, they're
bold
modest.
steps.
They are modest. But they're getting huge pushback from the very financial institutions who are taking our money. There are banks who are incensed to be asked what they're doing with the money, or to be told that there will be restrictions on executive compensation or corporate jets or golf tournaments. And there are those in the Treasury Department and on Wall Street who are worried that not enough banks will take taxpayer dollars if we try to put too many of these kinds of restrictions or ask too many hard questions.
Do you think that's a real threat?
You know, I don't care if it's a real threat. If they don't want our money because it means that they will have to change some of their business practices, then don't take our money.
go on your own.
You bet.
Now, Secretary Geithner has a plan for what he calls revamping financial oversight. What do you think of that?
Again, I hope it works. I hope we get more transparency. We've got to see some more details here.
Not exactly a ringing endorsement, Doctor.
Not yet.
But let's talk about how is all this affecting the average American, average families?
Well, you know, it must feel a little like living in a war zone. For some folks, you've been hit by one of the bombs. You've been laid off. You've had a serious family illness when you have no health insurance. And these are families that are just in economic tailspins. For others, they're making it day to day, but they look left, they look right, and they see what's happening to people in their families, people in their neighborhoods. They see how their communities are changing in significant ways, that the whole community is under stress. Schools are losing funding, police officers are being laid off. These are real impacts. I think what has shifted has been the sense of isolation. In a time of prosperity, that was all that was in the newspapers. That was all that was everywhere. Fancy new cars, right? Everybody was getting rich in that boom time. The reality was middle-class families were not. They were losing ground in the last boom time. This is the first time in American history this has happened, that family incomes were lower at the end than they were at the beginning of the boom time, that families were carrying bigger debt loads, that the costs of the basics, housing, health insurance, transportation, child care, were continuing to take a bigger bite out of their incomes. And yet they looked around them and said, people next door look like they're doing fine, people across the street are doing fine. We must be the only ones who didn't pull it together, who somehow are not winners in this great game. Today they know that's not the case. Today the story is about middle-class America. We're looking around and saying, you know, things are tough out there. They're tough for a lot of folks. They're tough for people who worked hard, who played by the rules, who thought they were doing everything to provide for themselves and their children. And in that sense, I actually think it may be a little easier now. Times
because
are
you
tough.
know it's shared.
That's right, but they're tough for everybody.
Well, in terms of survival of the middle class, what you've said consistently for a long time is about the survival of the America that we've known. In terms of chances for survival of the middle class, where are we?
We're at that point. It really could go either way from here. We could come out of this stronger, back with our basic values, back with a set of rules that are designed to help working families, a set of rules that help little businesses, help people get started, a set of rules that say, you know, you can't just pick the meat off the bones of every family through credit cards and payday loans and crazy mortgages. A set of rules that are basically fair and that strengthen the middle class. Or with this combination of the tax burden we're taking on, continued layoffs, skyrocketing costs on health care, we could break the back of the middle class we knew.
But is this money that we the taxpayers are putting in this, is this going down? Is it getting down to the families who need it most, as we sit here today?
Not yet. And I'm not sure the money put into the banking system through this bailout, I'm not sure if it ever makes it down to the family level.
Who's responsible for watching that?
Treasury has almost unlimited discretion in how to spend this money. And they spent a huge part of it last fall under the previous administration with no strings attached. And now the current Treasury is trying to figure out how to divide it up. And I want to give them credit. They've taken some of that money and said it's going to go into dealing with foreclosures. That's a good sign. But where the rest of the money is going to go and what the terms are going to be, how much we're going to demand from the banks that take this money, that's all still an open question.
In your opinion, are we going to have to break up some of the biggest banks, the quote, too big to fail banks?
You know, I'm not sure if the right question is to break them up or to let them fall apart. Right now, we're providing the billions of dollars that are keeping them together. We might decide at some point, we might look into whether or not we think that's an appropriate use of taxpayer dollars.
Are you or you're not suggesting that you think we're at that point now with the banks?
Well, I find it so ironic that where we are now with the banks is by their own weight, they might start breaking apart, given that there's a question about their financial solvency, and that the moment where we find ourselves in history is that we're putting taxpayer dollars in them to keep them together. Indeed, some of the TARP funds have been used for big banks to acquire other banks and become even bigger. So at this moment, this very moment when you and I speak, we're at this crossroads of these huge institutions, and yet the taxpayer is being called on to feed them because they are too big not only to fail, they are too big to feed themselves.
What can you say to Americans about where this all ends and when it all ends? Do you have any idea?
Partly, I want to say Americans will decide when it ends. You know, we had that big dust-up over AIG a couple of weeks ago, and Congress was shocked to hear how people felt about that. And in fact, there were even some pundits who were saying, oh, you know, it's only tiny little dollars, who cares? I'll tell you who cares. People care that their money is going into financial institutions with so little control and so little accountability that those institutions can continue to behave as if it is business as usual and take what they want to take. When the American people say more than once, enough, enough, then it will be enough and this will be over.
Professor Elizabeth Warren. Up next, how to make sense of all these enormous numbers coming from Washington. A visit to the math professor is next. Welcome back. To paraphrase a lawmaker from long ago, a billion here, a billion there, and pretty soon we're talking about real money. So we thought we'd try to put some perspective on all these numbers swirling about. The billions of dollars of bailout, stimulus, and debt. But we're not talking about the policy behind the numbers. Rather, we're talking about the numbers themselves.
We can all understand a $5 hamburger, a $20,000 car, and a $350,000 mortgage. But we hear about a $700 billion stimulus package. Do we stop to think what that really means? Or do we just think of it as a few more zeros? Is it a big deal or just big numbers? So, when you want to know about the madness behind the math, go to the best. We sat down with one of this country's brightest mathematical minds, Temple University professor John Paulus.
Put what's happening in Washington in terms of these numbers, trillions of dollars, billions of dollars, in some perspective for us.
There's various ways to get a more visceral grasp of these numbers. I mean, one way that I like involves a kind of time analogy. A million seconds takes about 11.5 days to tick by. And a billion seconds takes 32 years. And a trillion seconds, 32,000 years. So maybe if you think of it in terms of a jail sentence, you want to go to jail for 11.5 days, or maybe 32 years, or maybe 32,000 years, it becomes more visceral. So people tend to lump them together, perhaps because they rhyme, but they're vastly different quantities.
Well, let's go over that again then. Let's use your time analogy for $1 million.
Right. So you spend $1 a second, 11.5 days, it's gone.
$1 billion.
Spend $1 a second, 32 years, it's gone.
And $1 trillion.
You spend $1 a second, 32,000 years, a mere 32,000 years, and it's disappeared.
But that's for $1 trillion.
That's for $1 trillion.
We're talking several times here.
Yeah, no, I mean the bailout, the cost of the Iraq War, the GDP is about 14 trillion. And it is difficult to get a kind of feel for such numbers. I mean, the best way is to just compare it to other numbers, quantities that maybe have slightly better feel for.
And numbers can be deceiving. There are only 12 million cars a day on Los Angeles freeways. Seems small unless you're stuck in traffic. While the Iraq War costs $200 million a day. Professor Paulus wrote a book called Innumeracy, in which he criticized Americans for not paying enough attention to the basic arithmetic around them. He says the key thing is to relate numbers you hear about to those you already know.
I think it helps you if they know common numbers, numbers like, I mentioned the population of the United States, should know it's approximately 300 million. They should know it's approximately 3,000 miles from coast to coast. Should know the population of the world is about 6.5 billion. And the more such numbers you know, the easier it is to put new big numbers into perspective.
Which makes the $700 billion bailout bill for the stimulus package easier to understand. It's not really $700 billion, more like $2,300 for every man, woman, and child in America. Here's another way to look at billions and trillions of dollars. Take the crowd at a big football stadium like the University of Michigan.
So if you can imagine the Michigan football stadium you've seen on television with 100,000 people, right, and each of them has $1, it would take how many Michigan stadiums filled to make $1 million?
All right, 10.
And how many to make $1 billion?
10,000.
10,000 of those full stadiums, everybody having $1 in their pocket. Yeah. And $1 trillion?
10,000 times 1,000, so 10 million.
So it would take 10 million full Michigan stadium of people, yeah, each with $1 in their pocket.
Yeah. And Paulus says the public needs to think about numbers like this, if for no other reason than to keep honest the politicians who throw budgets, spending bills, and tax cuts about willy-nilly with huge price tags.
There must be a lot of people in the same position I'm in, which you hear these numbers thrown about in Washington. It's constant with the 24/7 news cycle there on the television all the time. Do the people running the government themselves, the Treasury Secretary, the Council of Economic Advisors, do they understand how much money they're talking?
I think they understand, but I think sometimes some politicians themselves are enumerate, or if they're not, they can sometimes rely on the innumeracy of their constituents to score political points, and that's probably not a healthy, doesn't make for a healthy democracy.
So when a congressman gets on TV and says something will cost $100 billion, or it's written like this, it looks a whole lot different than if you write it like this. All part of the numbers game. And if you think these numbers are big, and they are, bankers have nothing on astronomers. There are, according to astronomers, 70 sextillion stars in the universe. That's a 7 followed by 22 zeros.
Looking up at the night sky and its countless stars is a lesson in perspective. And that's a word that's so important to keep in mind. In these dark economic days when many in our nation are suffering, it's vital that we stay true to the fundamental values on which this country was founded, but to which we have not always remained faithful. In 1937, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt stated as much in his second inaugural address, using words that are very much applicable today. Roosevelt said, quote, "Old truths have been relearned. Untruths have been unlearned. We have always known that heedless self-interest was bad morals. We now know that it is bad economics. Out of the collapse of a prosperity whose builders boasted their practicality has come the conviction that in the long run, economic morality pays. Roosevelt, on a cold and rainy inaugural day, went on to eloquently catalog a nation in deep distress. It's a reminder of the challenges the United States has faced and overcome. So tonight, we end with Roosevelt's voice from nearly 75 years ago and pictures of this country's deepest and most enduring economic crisis. They're faces of a different time, but the story of human struggle remains deeply relevant.
But here is the challenge to our democracy. In this nation, I see tens of millions of its citizens, a substantial part of its whole population, who at this very moment are denied the greater part of what the very lowest standards of today call the necessities of life. I see millions of families trying to live on income so meager that the pall of family disaster hangs over them day by day. I see millions whose daily lives in city and on farm continue under conditions labeled indecent by a so-called polite society half a century ago. I see millions denied education, recreation, and the opportunity to better the lot of themselves and their children. I see millions lacking the means to buy the products of farm and factory, and by their poverty, denying work and productiveness to many other millions. I see 1/3 of a nation ill-housed, ill-clad, ill-nourished. But it is not in despair that I paint that picture for you. I paint it for you in hope. We are determined to make every American citizen the subject of his country's interests and concerns, and we will never regard any faithful, law-abiding group within our borders as superfluous. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. If I know aught of the spirit and purpose of our nation, we will not listen to comfort, opportunism, and timidity. We will carry on.
To carry on, to overcome comfort, opportunism, and timidity. Words for then and now. And that's our report for tonight. From New York, for HDNet, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
If you would like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net.